"You call that ink? I've seen better art on bathroom walls, Grandpa." The voice was sharp, cutting through the placid afternoon air with the casual cruelty of youth. It belonged to a young man built like a monument to physical perfection, his fresh buzzcut and cocky smirk identifying him as one of the SEAL candidates who strode across the naval amphibious base Coronado as if they owned it. Frank Nelson, 84 years old and on his knees tending a bed of marigolds near the main barracks, didn't even look up. His hands, gnarled with age but still steady, continued to gently pat the soil around a new bloom. He wore a faded work shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows revealing weathered forearms. On his left arm was the object of the recruit's scorn, a tattoo, its lines blurred by time into a faint grayish-blue emblem. It looked like a crude drawing of a frog holding a trident. Another recruit, equally formidable, laughed. "Is that a tadpole with a fork, Pops? What's that supposed to mean? You were a cook in the tadpole division." The small group of candidates circled him, their shadows falling over the flower bed. They were young, brimming with the invincible arrogance that came with being chosen for the world's most demanding military training. To them, this old man was just part of the scenery, a relic to be idly poked for amusement between brutal training evolutions. Frank finished with his flower and slowly, methodically began to gather his small hand tools. He moved with the deliberate economy of an old man, a stark contrast to the explosive energy radiating from the young men surrounding him. He remained silent, his calm a placid lake against which their taunts were just noisy splashes. His silence seemed to provoke them, to challenge their assumed dominance. The first recruit, a man whose name tag read Peterson, leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial sneer. "Come on, Gramps. Don't be shy. We just want to hear the war story that goes with your little doodle. Or did you get it on a drunken weekend in Tijuana?" A small crowd had begun to form. Other sailors and a few civilian base workers slowed their pace, drawn by the confrontation. Some watched with amusement, others with a growing sense of unease. The sight of 3 physically imposing SEAL candidates looming over a kneeling octogenarian was a study in mismatched forces. Peterson, emboldened by the audience, pushed further. He wasn't just mocking now, he was performing. "Look at this guy. Probably hangs around the base all day trying to soak up some of the glory he never earned. Bet you were a supply clerk, weren't you, old man? Stamping boxes while the real men were out fighting." Frank finally looked up. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, held no anger, no fear. They were deep set in a web of wrinkles, and they seemed to look right through the young man in front of him. They held a weight, a history, that made Peterson's confident smirk falter for a fraction of a second. "It's just a memory, son," Frank said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. It was quiet but carried clearly in the salty air. The simple, non-confrontational reply was like fuel on a fire. Peterson felt his brief moment of uncertainty morph into renewed aggression. How dare this old man be so unfazed? "A memory," Peterson scoffed, his voice loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "A memory of what? Forgetting to reorder the ketchup. This is a base for warriors, people who have earned the right to be here. I think maybe you're lost." He reached out and poked Frank's tattooed arm with a thick finger. "This kindergarten art is an insult to the real ink on this base." He gestured to his own arm, where a professionally done tattoo of an eagle and an anchor was visible. It was a badge of his ambition, a testament to the future he was trying to seize. Frank's tattoo, in contrast, looked homemade, imperfect, a relic of a forgotten past. Peterson and his friends saw weakness, a pathetic attempt at relevance. They couldn't comprehend that they were looking at the difference between a commercial and a prayer. The tension in the air thickened. The junior petty officer who should have been stepping in just hovered at the edge of the crowd, clearly intimidated by the SEAL candidates and unwilling to risk their wrath. The standoff continued, the recruits puffing their chests, Frank remaining preternaturally calm, his breathing even, his gaze distant. He had faced down men with rifles and machetes in jungles where the canopy blocked out the sun. The blustering of these boys was like the buzzing of harmless flies. Peterson, misinterpreting Frank's stillness as fear or senility, decided to escalate. He grabbed Frank's worn canvas bag of tools. "Maybe we should check your ID. Make sure you're even supposed to be here." He made a show of rummaging through the bag, pulling out a small trowel, a pair of gloves, and a tarnished silver thermos. He held up the thermos. "What's in here, Grandpa?" "Prune juice." The laughter from his friends was sharp and cruel. The crowd murmured, the unease turning to quiet disapproval. This had gone beyond casual hazing. It was becoming a public humiliation. Still, Frank did not react. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. He had learned long ago that the loudest man in the room is often the weakest. He had learned patience in ambush positions where he'd stayed motionless for days. He could wait this out. He knew the nature of pride. He knew that given enough rope it would always eventually hang itself. The lead recruit's thumb pressed down hard on the faded tattoo, trying to smudge the lines as if it were dirt. As the pressure and friction warmed the old man's skin, the bright California sun and the mocking laughter dissolved into a suffocating, enveloping darkness. It wasn't a thought, but a cascade of sensation. The smell of mangrove mud, thick and sulphurous. The humid press of air so heavy it felt like a wet blanket on his skin. The sting of salt water in a cut on his cheek and the incessant, high-pitched whine of mosquitoes. In his mind's eye, he saw the glint of moonlight on the dark, silent water of a river snaking through a jungle that had no name on any official map. He felt the vibration of a PBR boat's engine, a low thrum that was both a lifeline and a potential death knell. Then the image of a needle, a real needle sterilized in whiskey, held in the steady hand of his teammate Mac. He felt the familiar rhythmic sting as Mac traced the design into his skin, using ink made from rifle-cleaning soot and a splash of that same whiskey. There was no sterile parlor, no comfortable chair, just 3 young men, ghosts in the deep of a war that didn't officially exist, huddled under a poncho in the pouring monsoon rain. They were marking themselves, not for others to see, but for each other. They were creating a secret crest for a secret brotherhood, a symbol of a promise to go where no one else would, and to bring each other home. It was a sacrament administered in mud and blood. The sensation vanished as quickly as it came. The sun was back, the laughter was still there, but the memory had resurfaced, sharp and clear, reminding him exactly what that faded ink truly represented. Across the quad, standing partially obscured by a large palm tree, Master Chief Petty Officer Riggs watched the scene unfold. Riggs was a command master chief, a man who had been in the Navy for 30 years. He had seen generations of recruits come and go, had witnessed every flavor of arrogance and idiocy. But this was different. This felt profane. His first instinct was to stride over there and tear a strip off those candidates so wide they'd be lucky to be reassigned to scraping barnacles off a buoy in the Arctic. But he hesitated. It wasn't just the disrespect that bothered him. It was something in the old man's bearing, his unnatural calm, and something else, something familiar about that crude, faded tattoo. He'd seen a sketch of it once, years ago in a dusty, unofficial history of the very first naval special warfare operators. A history that was mostly rumor and legend. Riggs looked closer at the old man's face. The lines, the set of his jaw, a name clicked in his memory, a ghost from the Navy's most secret annals. It couldn't be. That man was a myth, a legend whispered about by the instructors at Bud/Aura. Riggs's blood ran cold. He didn't walk toward the confrontation. He turned and walked briskly away, pulling out his phone. The crowd saw him leave and some sagged with disappointment, assuming another authority figure was choosing not to get involved. They were wrong. Riggs was not retreating, he was escalating to a level they couldn't possibly imagine. He found the number in his contacts for the base commander's personal aide. He pressed the call button, his heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against his ribs. "This is Master Chief Riggs," he said, his voice low and urgent, his back to the scene. "Get me the captain. I don't care if he's in a meeting with the Secretary of the Navy." There was a moment of sputtering on the other end of the line. "Master Chief, he's in his quarterly command brief. I am aware of what day it is." Riggs cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You tell Captain Thorne that he needs to get down to the grinder right now. And tell him it's about Frank Nelson." A pause, then a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Frank Nelson? Are you sure?" "I'm looking right at him," Riggs said, glancing back over his shoulder. He could see Peterson now trying to physically pull the old man to his feet. And he's about to be assaulted by 3 SEAL candidates who don't know they're poking a sleeping god. "Get him down here, now." While Riggs was on the phone, the humiliation peaked. Peterson, having failed to get a rise out of Frank with insults, decided to force the issue. He grabbed the old man by his thin bicep, his fingers digging into the wiry muscle. "All right, Grandpa, show's over," he said, trying to haul Frank to his feet. "Let's get you to base security. They can figure out which nursing home you escaped from." The act of putting his hands on him, of treating him like a lost child or a vagrant, crossed a final line. Frank didn't resist. He allowed himself to be pulled upward, his joints creaking in protest. But for the first time, a flicker of something other than patience appeared in his eyes. It was an ancient cold fire, a look that said he had calculated the precise amount of force needed to snap the young man's arm in 3 places, and was actively choosing not to employ it. He let out a quiet sigh, not of fear but of profound disappointment. The lesson, it seemed, would have to be a hard one. Captain Thorne, commander of the Naval Special Warfare Center, was in the middle of a PowerPoint slide about budget allocations when his aide, a young lieutenant, burst into the conference room without knocking. The lieutenant's face was ashen, his eyes wide. "Sir," he stammered, "Master Chief Riggs on the line. He says it's a Condition 1 emergency." Thorne, a man whose resting heart rate was about the same as a hibernating bear's, fixed his aide with an annoyed stare. "A Condition 1 emergency better mean the Russians are landing at Imperial Beach, Lieutenant. He said to tell you, sir, it's Frank Nelson." The name dropped into the sterile, air-conditioned room like a grenade. The half-dozen high-ranking officers around the table froze. PowerPoint presentations and budget charts were forgotten. A command master chief at the end of the table audibly gasped. "Frank Nelson," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He snatched the phone from his aide's hand. "Riggs, talk to me." He listened for no more than 10 seconds. His face went from disbelief to shock, then settled into a mask of cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting.
"He's where? With who?"
Thorne stood up, kicking his chair back. "Get my vehicle! Now! Alert the entire base command staff. I want every department head, every command master chief at the grinder in 5 minutes. Full dress uniform if they can manage it. Move!" He slammed the phone down. The other officers were already on their feet, a look of dawning horror on their faces. "Captain," one of them asked, "is it really him? I thought he was." "He is," Thorne cut in, his voice like cracking ice. "And he's on our base, being harassed by candidates who think the trident on his arm is a cartoon. We have a catastrophic failure of respect on our hands, gentlemen. Let's go fix it." The room emptied in seconds, leaving the budget allocation slide glowing forlornly on the screen. The audience outside the barracks, the recruits, Frank, none of them knew that a storm of brass and fury was about to break directly over their heads. They only knew the standoff had reached an unbearable peak, with Peterson's hand still clamped firmly on the old man's arm. The first sound was a distant siren, not the familiar whoop-whoop of a police car, but the piercing, authoritative wail of military command vehicles. Heads turned. The sound grew louder, closer, multiplying. Then they appeared. A convoy of black SUVs and command trucks, lights flashing, screeched to a halt on the access road bordering the quad. They surrounded the area in a formidable semicircle, cutting off all escape. Doors flew open with military precision. Out poured not MPs, but a wave of authority that stunned the crowd into silence. The first man out was Captain Thorne, his crisp service dress whites seeming to glow in the afternoon sun, the golden eagle of his rank glittering on his collar. His face was a thundercloud. Behind him came his senior staff, a dozen officers and command master chiefs, men whose collective gaze could make steel buckle. They moved with a singular, terrifying purpose, their eyes sweeping the scene and locking onto the small drama at its center. The air crackled with sudden immense pressure. The laughing and jeering had died instantly, replaced by a confused, terrified silence. The SEAL candidates, including Peterson, froze mid-posture. Their arrogance evaporated like mist, replaced by the primal fear of a recruit caught in the crosshairs of the highest possible command. Peterson's hand, still on Frank's arm, suddenly felt like it was holding a live grenade. He let go as if he'd been burned, snatching it back and snapping to a shaky, terrified attention. He and his friends looked like children caught drawing on the walls with permanent marker by a furious parent. The sheer, unexpected weight of the response was incomprehensible. Captain Thorne strode through the paralyzed crowd as if parting the sea. He didn't look at the recruits. He didn't acknowledge the onlookers. His eyes, burning with an intensity that seemed to make the air shimmer, were locked on one person, and one person only, Frank Nelson. He came to a halt precisely 3 feet in front of the old man, his polished black shoes gleaming on the pavement. The entire base, it seemed, held its breath. Then, in a movement so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air, Captain Thorne snapped to the most perfect ramrod straight salute of his entire decorated career. It was a gesture of such profound, unadulterated respect that it sent a shockwave through the crowd. "Mr. Nelson," the captain's voice boomed, clear and resonant, stripped of all anger and filled only with a deep, humbling reverence. "It is an honor to have you on my base, sir. I offer my deepest, most sincere apology for the reception you have received from my men." He held the salute, his arm rigid, his gaze locked forward. The recruits stared, their minds utterly failing to process what was happening. "Mr. Nelson? Sir?" The base commander was saluting the old gardener. Thorne turned his head slightly, his eyes falling upon Peterson and the other 2 candidates, who were now visibly trembling. His voice dropped, but lost none of its carrying power. "You 3. You see this man? You see this tattoo you found so amusing?" He didn't wait for an answer. His words became a history lesson, delivered with the force of a battering ram. "This is Frank Nelson. He wasn't a supply clerk. Before there were even SEALs, this man was a frogman in the underwater demolition teams. He hit the beaches at Incheon when your grandfathers were still in diapers. When this country needed men to do the impossible in Vietnam, he was one of the founding members of SEAL Team 1. He volunteered for MACV-SOG, running cross-border operations so secret that for decades the official record said they never happened." The captain's gaze drifted to the faded ink on Frank's arm. "This tadpole with a fork, as you so cleverly called it, is not a joke. It is the original hand-drawn insignia for a 3-man recon unit he led, a unit so effective they were known only as ghosts. They called themselves the Delta Frogmen. They went into places that made hell look like a holiday, and unlike almost every other unit of its kind, he brought every single one of his men home, every one." The crowd was utterly silent, hanging on every word. The weight of 70 years of hidden history was descending upon that small patch of grass and flowers. "This man," Thorne continued, his voice thick with emotion, "wrote the book we all live by. He didn't literally write it, he forged it with his actions in mud and blood and jungles. Chapters of the SEAL ethos that you recite, that you pretend to understand, are based on declassified reports of his missions. He is not a relic. He is the foundation upon which this entire command is built. He is a living legend." Frank, who had stood patiently through the entire speech, slowly raised a weathered hand and gave a gentle dismissive wave toward the captain, a silent at ease. His expression was one of mild embarrassment, as if he were an intensely private man suddenly thrust under a spotlight. "It was a long time ago, Captain," Frank said, his quiet voice a stark contrast to the commander's ringing declaration. "A different world." Captain Thorne slowly, reluctantly dropped his salute. He then turned his full, undivided attention to the 3 recruits. The temperature on the quad seemed to drop by 20 degrees. His voice was no longer loud, but a lethal, controlled whisper that was infinitely more menacing. "You are candidates to join an elite brotherhood. You are supposed to be the best this nation has to offer. The very first principle of that brotherhood is honor. The second is respect. You have shown neither. You stood here, on ground sanctified by the men who came before you, and you mistook quiet dignity for weakness. You mistook age for irrelevance. You dishonored yourselves, you dishonored the uniform you hoped to wear, and you dishonored a man to whom every single one of us owes a debt that can never be repaid." He let the words hang in the air for a long, brutal moment. "As of this moment, your candidacies for basic underwater demolition/CL training are suspended pending a full review by me personally. Report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. Now get out of my sight." The 3 recruits, their faces pale with shock and shame, seemed to shrink. They mumbled, "Yes, sir," turned and practically fled, the eyes of the entire crowd following them like burning spotlights. As they were led away, Frank stepped forward and put a gentle hand on Captain Thorne's arm. "They're just kids, Captain," he said softly, full of fire and vinegar. "We were the same, once." He turned his gaze to the remaining crowd of young sailors. "Pride is a heavy anchor. It can hold you steady in a storm, or it can drag you straight to the bottom. The trick is knowing which it's doing." His words, simple and delivered without a trace of malice, settled over the crowd. It was a lesson, not a condemnation, offered freely from a place of deep and hard-won wisdom. As Frank spoke those words of wisdom, "We were the same once," the scene flickered for a final poignant moment. In the mind's eye, the California sun gave way to the dripping green canopy of a jungle. A much younger Frank Nelson, no older than Peterson, sat on an ammo crate in a makeshift hooch, the air thick with the smell of rain and damp canvas. He was sketching a design on a scrap of waterproof paper with a piece of charcoal. His 2 teammates, their faces smeared with camouflage paint, leaned in to see. "What is it, Frankie?" one of them asked, his voice a low Boston rasp. "It's for us," young Frank said, a grin flashing in the dim lantern light. "We're ghosts in the Delta. We're frogmen. So the Delta Frogmen." He pointed the charcoal at his crude drawing of a frog holding a trident. "This is our mark." The moment was one of pure youthful bravado, of brotherhood forged in shared danger. It was the birth of the very symbol that had just been mocked, a direct link between the quiet old man and the arrogant boys, underscoring the truth of his words. The fallout from that afternoon was swift and decisive. Captain Thorne, true to his word, made the incident a teachable moment for the entire command. A new module was immediately added to the SEAL training curriculum, focusing on the history and heritage of naval special warfare. It wasn't about dates and battles, but about the men themselves, the legends and the quiet professionals. It became mandatory for all hands on the base, from the rawest seaman to the most senior officer, to attend a quarterly brief on respect for all generations of service members. The story of Frank Nelson and the Delta Frogman tattoo became a cautionary tale, a legend told to new recruits on their first day to remind them that the ground they trained on was sacred, and the quiet civilians they walked past might be giants. Peterson and his two friends were not kicked out of the Navy. That would have been the easy way out. Their review concluded that their arrogance was a symptom of ignorance, not a terminal failure of character. Their punishment was far more fitting. They were rolled back, forced to start the grueling, soul-crushing 6-month BUG/program all over again from day one with a new class. They were humbled, broken down, and forced to re-earn their place, this time carrying the heavy weight of their shame. Weeks later, a much-changed Peterson was on a work detail, his muscles aching, his spirit raw. His detail was to tidy the grounds around the barracks. He saw Frank Nelson, tending the same bed of marigolds. The old man was on his knees, humming a tune from a long-forgotten era. Peterson's heart hammered in his chest. He took a deep breath, walked over, and stood a respectful distance away until Frank looked up. "Mr. Nelson," Peterson said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For my disrespect. For everything." Frank looked at the young man. The cocky smirk was gone, replaced by a deep-seated humility. He saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a new flicker of understanding. Frank nodded slowly. He reached into his small cooler, pulled out a cold bottle of water and held it out. "I know, son," he said. He waited for Peterson to take the water. Lesson learned is more important than the mistake made. He gestured with his head toward the distant sound of training. "Keep your head down and your heart right. The water doesn't care how proud you are. It only cares if you can swim." Peterson took the water, his throat too tight to speak. He just nodded, a silent promise passing between the old warrior and the one who was just beginning. Frank Nelson's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day. If you were moved by his quiet valor, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of unassuming heroes.